Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Once Upon a Sexy Scrooge by Ella Frank and Brooke Blaine, narrated by Aiden Snow. Maxwell. Present day. As I sat in my car in the never-ending traffic jam that was Midtown Manhattan, I scowled at each and every one of the pedestrians who strolled so happily down the sidewalks with their heaps of shopping bags, their bright eyes taking in the overdone holiday window displays like they'd never seen an animatronic Santa before. The whole scene made me roll my eyes. Didn't they know there was nothing magical about this time of year? Thousands of people piled into the city, cramming our already strained subways and streets, pouring money into big box stores that only cared about their bottom dollar and how to win the rat race. I would know. I was one of them. With the traffic still unmoving, I put my car in park and sighed, letting my head drop against the headrest. Was it just me, or had this year been a constant struggle to keep my head above water? It didn't make sense, though. I'd moved up in the company I worked for, an acquisitions firm at the top of its game, so finances would never be a worry. I had more money than I knew what to do with, not that it helped much in my current circumstances other than the heated seats keeping my ass warm. Horns blasted all around me, and I looked up to see the light had flipped to green, but the mass of people on the crosswalk hadn't eased. It was a damn free-for-all, and some of the taxi drivers had apparently had enough. They inched forward almost close enough to graze, but that didn't do much to give them a clear path. But once a pair of men stepped onto the crosswalk carrying a Christmas tree between them, the shouts began. "Get out of the damn road! Hey, you want a pair of broken legs for Christmas? I'ma shove that tree right up your..." And on that note, I hit the button to close the inch of window I'd had down for some fresh air. Christmas. It brought out the best in everyone. I glanced at my watch and tapped on the steering wheel, my patience running thin. I'd been due at the office nearly 15 minutes ago, but thanks to this circus, I was now running late. Didn't these people have places to be, families to visit or something? Surely after 5 department stores, they all started to look the same. But as people hurried across the street, weaving in and out of the idling vehicles, it was starting to look like they had the better idea. Maybe I should get out and walk the last 5 blocks. It would probably be quicker. As the light cycled back to red without us moving an inch, I turned on the radio and groaned at the DJ, wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. See, this was the problem with this particular holiday. You couldn't escape it. The second that last bite of turkey was eaten, it was as though a switch was flipped and everything turned sparkly and new. There was even a set playlist for this time of year that was pulled out and played ad nauseum until everyone was so sick of the songs they were happy when they were put away for the other 11 months of the year. It was a farce, the whole damn thing. A scheme dreamed up by greedy men who decided it was just another way to make a buck. So cynical, Max. What happened to make you that way? I blinked as the deep, familiar voice filled my head. It was so clear that I even caught myself looking at the empty passenger seat as a sappy song about coming home for Christmas started to play on the radio. Seriously, now I was hallucinating? I squeezed the bridge of my nose and shut my eyes, my mind wandering back to a small town outside of the city. A place where, for a moment in time, I'd forgotten the hustle and bustle of the real world and been swept up by holiday magic. Maxwell. 1 year earlier. You think you can pull this deal off and be back in the city by Christmas? My jaw twitched as I resisted the urge to tell my colleague at Willett Goss to mind his business. Doubting me, Patrick? No, but it's a tough turnaround, even for you, and the holidays make people more sentimental about holding on to shit. Well, Micah Noble hasn't met me. He doesn't know just how persuasive I can be when there's something I want. Patrick laughed down the phone. Isn't that the damn truth? I ignored the voice in the back of my mind that tried to remind me I'd already been shut down by the Noble family several times over the phone, but that was exactly why I'd decided to drive to Vermont only days before Christmas. In the decade I'd worked in acquisitions, I hadn't lost a property yet, and I sure as hell wasn't about to start now that a promotion to partner was dangling over my head. A sign on the side of the road announcing Noble's Christmas Tree Farm 5 miles caught my attention as I carefully navigated an icy curve. "Patrick, I'm almost there. I'll let you know when the deal is done." Then I ended the call just as the tires of my Lexus decided to slide over the yellow line into the other lane. A car coming from the opposite direction flashed its lights at me as it drew closer, and I instinctively jerked the wheel to the right. Shit! I lost control and tried to right myself, holding my breath as I braced for impact. But a few seconds later, the other car passed without incident, and I let out a long sigh. Driving up here felt like I was on a damn slip-and-slide, and I was over it. "Haven't they heard of salt?" I muttered, slowing down. Why anyone would choose to live somewhere that got snow up to their roof was beyond me. It was bad enough navigating the city when that stuff fell, but out here, one wrong move and you could end up sliding into a snowdrift on the side of the road, never to be seen again. That wasn't how I planned to go. I loosened my grip on the steering wheel and stared at the fat snowflakes hitting my windshield. They were coming much faster now, and if I didn't want to get stranded out here, I needed to move. I slowly pressed my foot on the gas and began to inch the car forward, gingerly navigating the road and turning what should have been a 10-minute drive into 20. But when I spotted a large wooden gate shoved open with Noble's Christmas Tree Farm on a sign hanging above it, I let out a sigh of relief. I'd made it, and in one piece, too. It was a Christmas miracle. I looked at the winding road that led into the property and spotted a log cabin a little ways up the plowed path. There was smoke curling up out of one of the chimneys, and off in the distance a barn that towered up behind the cabin. It was exactly what you'd imagine if someone said, "Think of a log cabin in the woods." And wouldn't you know, there was even a man out front of it chopping wood. Well, I wasn't going to get any deals done sitting out in my car like some sort of creeper. It was time to put my money where my mouth was. I turned into the property, and as I drove up toward the cabin, took a second to look around. Out to my left, as far as the eye could see, were rows and rows of pine trees, some big and some small, but all of them were capped and dusted with the snow falling, making the place look like a winter wonderland. It was beautiful, picturesque even. I could see why someone wouldn't want to give it up. But I could also see the potential for others to enjoy it, say in a luxury resort. Not that you'd find me staying in the middle of nowhere, but there was an overwhelming interest for those wanting to escape the city on weekends and to anywhere other than the Hamptons. I stopped a few feet away from the lumberjack guy. Hey, maybe he'd come in handy when we had to clear the lot, and shut off the engine. As I stepped out of my car, I buttoned my suit jacket and looked up at the cabin. It was a quaint little version of what we planned to build, albeit on a much more extravagant scale. Yes, this was the perfect spot, though we'd have to make sure the roads coming up this way got some work. "You lost?" It took me a minute to realize the voice had come from the guy chopping wood, and as I glanced over to where he stood, I did a double take. Taller and more built than I'd originally thought. He had to be at least 6'5", but that wasn't the only thing that stood out about him. The man was undeniably the most ruggedly sexy human I'd ever seen. I had never been hot for a guy with a beard before, but this man was changing my opinion on that quick fucking fast. It was thick and brown, but kept short, and matched his hair that was buzzed on one side while leaving the rest swooped over in a devil-may-care style that fell into his eyes. He brushed the hair back with his forearm, and the red and black flannel shirt he wore tightened against his broad chest. And don't even get me started on the jeans that fit his narrow waist and muscled thighs like a glove. "You're a day early. The tree farm doesn't open until tomorrow, so you'll have to come back then." I snapped myself out of my perusal. If he thought, dressed like I was in the car I drove, that I was here for a tree, then he was denser than I expected from someone so small town. Instead of responding and wasting my breath, and also because it was cold as shit and I needed to warm up ASAP, I headed toward the stairs of the cabin. But as I rounded the front of my car, my dress shoes slipped on a patch of ice and I began to fall. I grabbed onto the hood of my car just as a strong hand reached for my arm to hold me up. Humiliated, I righted myself and jerked my arm free. "I'm fine, I got it." Lumberjack snorted. "Yeah, that's obvious." I dusted my hands off on my jacket, the snow from the hood turning them icy cold as I turned on my judgmental savior, and did my best to regain some semblance of control. "I just have to get my bearings, that's all." Lumberjack eyed me up and down, and as he turned away, muttered, "You're gonna need a lot more than that." What the hell did that mean? Incensed by the obvious insult and the fact that this man somehow found me lacking, I stormed after him. Not the easiest thing to do when the ground was practically a skating rink and snow continued to fall in my eyes. "Look, I don't know how things are run around here, but I didn't come out here to be insulted." The lumberjack stopped by his pile of wood and picked up the axe, leaning against it. "Who said I was insulting you?" "I did, and I don't think your boss would like that very much." Or maybe he'd think you were rude and unthankful and do exactly the same thing." Okay, I was done dealing with this guy. "You know what? I don't have time for this. If you could point me in the direction of Mr. Noble, we'll just forget this ever happened." Lumberjack picked up the axe, resting the head against one of his mammoth shoulders, and took a step forward. Then, to my utter shock and dismay, held his other hand out. "Micah Noble, and let me guess, you're Maxwell Scott." Micah. Well, would you look at that, I thought as Maxwell's jaw all but hit the icy ground he'd just slipped on. The king has finally deigned to step out of his kingdom for 5 seconds of his life. I wasn't usually the spiteful type, but I couldn't help but take some kind of pleasure in just how out of place he seemed standing there in his designer shoes and perfectly tailored suit. Talk about a fish out of water. He looked as though he was dressed for a board meeting, not trekking it out here to snow country. But hey, if he wanted hypothermia, who was I to stop him? "You're Micah Noble?" The look on Maxwell's face was comical. I was obviously the last person he'd expected to find when he pulled up, and considering I was outside doing what he'd no doubt consider a menial task, I hardly expected him to correlate me with the owner of this property. "No, I'm Santa Claus. This is just my disguise." Maxwell arched a brow as his eyes shifted to my outstretched hand, and when it was clear he wasn't going to take it, I shook my head. "Look, why don't I save you some time, effort, and a pair of expensive leather shoes? What you're selling, I'm not interested in buying. So why don't you slip and slide your way back to the car and drive on out of here?" I turned back to my pile of wood and grabbed one of the stumps to place it on the wooden block. "Mr. Noble," my lips curled up at the much politer tone as I balanced the wooden stump and turned back to face the man I'd started to refer to as Scrooge in my head. He was straightening his lapels and looked as though he was gearing up to feed me some line about how rich he could make me if I just signed on the dotted line. But money wasn't a factor for me, and unfortunately for him, that was all he had to offer. "You still here?" I leaned the axe up against the side of the house and crossed my arms. "Yes, I think we got off on the wrong foot." "You think?" I lowered my eyes down his tailored pant legs and shrugged. "Maybe you should just count your lucky stars you're still on your feet." Maxwell bristled at the jab, twin spots of color heating his cheeks, and I couldn't help but think how adorable he looked, even as I wished him the hell off my property. "Okay, fine. Was I a bit of an ass? Sure. But I've had a long drive. I obviously underestimated the weather, and I'd like nothing better than to go inside somewhere that isn't 40 below to discuss why I'm here. I know why you're here. And I'll say it again. I'm not interested. You haven't even heard me out, and I don't plan to. I took a step toward Maxwell and straightened my shoulders. He wasn't a small guy by any means, but I was fully aware of my size, and if I needed to use it to get this guy off my property, I had no problem with that. The weekly phone calls and messages you've left have given me a pretty good idea of what it is you want, and it's not happening. So why don't you head on back to the city before it realizes you're gone and shuts down? Maxwell's jaw twitched, and I had the feeling he was biting his tongue so he wouldn't lash out the way I know I would have if I were in his position. I wasn't in the mood to waste his time or mine, though, and I turned on my heel and headed up the porch stairs. Wait. I glanced over my shoulder to see Maxwell sigh and cross his arms over his chest. Can you at least point me in the direction of a hotel? Why? Because you people don't know how to salt a road, and I'd rather not risk my life on an icy turn. Smirking, I turned back to Maxwell and pretend to think that over. I'm guessing you'll want something 5-star, 4 at the least, something with a full bar and one of those soft robes they give you. The relief on his face almost sent me over the edge as he nodded. That would be perfect. I bet it would. Pity you won't find one within a couple 100 miles of here. Good luck, though. I started back up the stairs when Maxwell's grunt of frustration sounded behind me. Fine, what about a 3-star? I let out a whistle. You don't mind slumming it for the night? If I have to. I mean, I'll have to check for bed bugs because you never know with these places, but let me stop you right there, I said, whirling around again. Maryhill isn't exactly a tourist spot, and that's the way we like it. You won't find so much as a side-of-the-road motel around here, so put on your big boy pants and drive back to New York. Maxwell had the good grace to look properly put in his place. I wasn't trying to be offensive, yet you managed to be anyway. Congratulations. Now, if you don't mind, I have things I need to do around here before it gets dark. I kicked the underside of my boots against the top landing of the porch, and once the snow was free, reached for the screen door. You're really going to make me drive home through a blizzard? In the dark? I gritted my teeth and prayed for patience as my fingers tightened on the handle. This guy couldn't have chosen a worse time to show up on my front doorstep. With the Christmas tree farm now open, I didn't have time to coddle some city boy, let alone a pain-in-my-ass city boy, who had done nothing but give me a headache since he discovered my phone number. I'm not making you do anything. I turned back to see him standing at the bottom of my stairs. You are the one who invited yourself up here, and you are the one who picked today of all days to drive out into the country. Maybe you should have thought about something other than lining your pockets before you got in a car that's not winterized and decided to drive through that blizzard you just mentioned. There, let him chew on that. I turned, about to fling open my door when I heard, "Wow, and you think I'm an asshole?" The vein at the side of my temple pulsed as I froze and counted back from 10. But around 8, I heard footsteps trudging up the stairs behind me. Look, I know you hate me and want me gone, but if I leave now, I'm likely going to kill myself or someone else. Do you really want that on your conscience? I let out a sigh because, damn it, he was right. There was no way I could, in good conscience, let him head out with the snowstorm I knew was coming tonight. But it had been easy enough to forget that when I was focused on how damn irritating he was. Fine. Fine? I reached for the screen door and yanked it open so hard I was surprised it didn't fly off the hinges. Fine, you can stay here. I shoved open the wooden door to the cabin. But you get in my way or piss me off in any way, I'm tossing your ass out quicker than you can say bah humbug. Maxwell. Considering I'd put my foot in my mouth more than once since meeting Micah Noble, it came as a surprise when he offered to put me up in his own home. Then again, he could have saved me this trip by just agreeing to Willett Goss's terms. So really it was his own damn fault I was here in the first place. And now stranded. He didn't hold the entry open for me to enter, and I caught the handle just before the door slammed shut after him. This should be fun. I stepped inside the cabin and almost sighed as a wave of warmth enveloped me. It got cold in the city, but I only ever had to walk from the entrance of a building to a car, so this shit up here was ridiculous. How do people live like this? It's not the Waldorf Astoria, but it'll keep you from freezing to death outside. He wasn't wrong about that. The 5-star accommodations, not the freezing part, though I'd take my chances. This place wasn't anything you'd see in the city, from the log cabin-type walls to the roaring fire in the small living room where a pile of quilts sat on the arm of the lone couch. Beside it was an oversized recliner that was currently being occupied by a dog of some sort with droopy eyes and Dumbo-sized ears. It looked up as I entered the room, blinked, and then closed its eyes again, and I snorted. "Some guard you have there. What is it?" "What is it? You don't have dogs in the city?" "Not ones that look like that." Micah crossed his arms over his thick chest and looked like he was struggling not to roll his eyes. "Snoopy's a basset hound, and he's got a mean bite, so leave him alone." "A mean bite, that lazy thing? Yeah, right." "You can stay up here," Micah said, heading up the stairs to the second floor, fully expecting me to follow, which I did. Only because I was curious about the kind of room I'd be sleeping in, not because I followed anyone else's orders. The hallway he led me down was narrow and pretty much identical to the outside of the house. Wood logs with gnarly knots lined the way, and as I trailed behind my hulking host, I couldn't help but wonder if he'd chopped down the trees that built this place. He came to a stop at the end of the hall, pushed open one of the doors, and stood aside. "This'll be you." I peered around the corner and into the small room where a narrow bed was pushed up against one wall with a wooden chest that sat at the end of it with a patchwork quilt folded on top of it. I walked inside and did a quick 360 and felt my claustrophobia creeping in on me. Yes, I lived in the city where narrow spaces were the norm for most, but I'd worked my ass off to afford much more than a tiny hovel of a dwelling, and this just felt like a step in the wrong direction. There was barely enough room for me to get changed in, not that I planned to get undressed any time soon, but if Mr. Muscle over there were to stretch his arms out, I'd bet money he'd be able to touch both walls. I glanced at the bed again. "Is this a single?" Micah raised a brow. "It's a bed. You got a problem with it? You can always sleep out in the barn." Before I could respond, Micah turned on his heel and started to walk away. I let out a breath and thought about just shutting the door and holing up in this room until the storm passed, but I quickly nixed that idea and rushed out after Micah instead. He was halfway back to the stairs when he said, "Bathroom's in there. There's only one, so don't take all night. And be careful with the hot water tap. It's fiddly." "Fiddly as in if you aren't careful, the handle won't be the only thing that falls off. So will your freezing balls." This place just gets better and better. "Hey, you're the one who invited yourself out here." Micah pushed off the doorframe, and just as he was about to turn away from me, I grabbed his arm and, Jesus, the thing was the size of a tree trunk. He glanced down at my hand and I quickly let go. "There a problem?" he asked. "No, I was just... There's no other bedroom up here. Where do you sleep?" "Why, you want someone to cuddle with?" "No." My denial was as instantaneous as it was strong, but I had to admit if he wasn't the man I'd been arguing with for the last several months, and he hadn't been such an ass today, I might have been tempted. "Good, 'cause that costs extra." He strode down the stairs, leaving me standing there with my mouth hanging open, and that was when I realized he hadn't answered my question. "Let me guess," I said, following. "You prefer the barn you mentioned?" "Not a bad option right about now." "What's that supposed to mean?" Micah whirled around without any warning, causing me to run into his chest face first. Yep, solid muscle. He'd owe me a nose job if I'd just cracked the damn thing. As I reached up to rub the bridge, Micah scowled. "Do you plan on following me around all night? You act like I want to be here. Well, you are the one who drove onto my property when I was looking forward to a nice, quiet evening. Alone. And I'd be happy to leave you alone once I get what I came for." Micah's eyes dropped to where I was still rubbing my nose. "A concussion? I'd prefer a signature, along with an understanding that, God, here we go." With a groan, Micah stomped down the rest of the stairs and toward the kitchen. "Would it kill you to have a conversation that could change your life? Give you all the money you need so you can get out of this place, and you think I give a shit about money? This is my home. I'll sell it over my cold, dead body." I nodded at the fireplace. "And if that goes out, I'm sure it'll happen. Nah, I've got enough firewood to last the next few months. And I can also throw you in it if I run out." "Is that a threat?" "Course not. Just making conversation." With the toe of his boot, Micah kicked out a chair from under the small dining table. "Sit if you're hungry." "You're going to cook for me? Leftover rabbit stew sound good?" "Rabbit?" I could feel the bile rise in my throat, taking over any feelings of hunger I may have had. "I think I'll pass." A snort of laughter escaped Micah as he turned off the burner where a large pot had been simmering. "Don't worry, city boy, it's just homemade vegetable soup with regular beef, nothing crazy." To trust or not to trust, that was the question. When I hesitated, my growling stomach made the decision for me, and I sat at the table as Micah ladled soup into bowls. The kitchen was as quaint as the rest of the house, with a single-door fridge, gas stove, and apron-style sink. That was it. There was no dishwasher, no center island, just the basics to get by with. I supposed the fact he had a fridge and stove were a step up in his world, though, because I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd been cooking the stew over an open flame. "So, how long have you lived here?" I asked as I took another look around the tight kitchen and living room, and judging by the worn floorboards and well-lived-in couch, I would guess a while. "My whole life." "Your whole life?" "As in, was born out in the barn." Micah paused and looked over his shoulder with a smirk. "So I guess you could say I have slept in there." I tried my hardest to keep my jaw from hitting the table, but come on. "You were born in a barn?" "It's not as uncommon as you think around here. A couple of us were born in that barn." "Us?" "My brothers and sisters," he said, bringing the bowls over to the table. "Us nobles have lived and died on this land for generations." Which was why he was being so damn obstinate about selling the place. Okay, well, at least I knew the reason behind his stubborn resolve. I'd known it had to be something like that, because only a complete moron would turn down the kind of cash we were offering. A complete moron, or a sentimental one. "You want anything to drink?" "Sure, I'll take a water." When he grabbed a glass out of one of the cabinets and turned on the tap, I quickly interrupted. "Or do you maybe have something in the fridge?" I should have known he wouldn't have the bottled kind. Micah flicked off the faucet, walked over to the fridge, pulled it open, and held up a beer. I screwed up my nose. "It's this or milk." "I suppose that's freshly milked from your own cows?" Micah's lips twitched. "I don't own cows." "I think I'll pass." He shrugged and kicked the door shut, then flicked off the top of the beer he held. As he straddled the chair and pulled it under the table, I picked up the soup spoon he'd handed me and stirred my stew. "So I gotta ask," Micah said before he took a swig of his beer, "because I've been scratching my head trying to figure this out, and after meeting you, I'm even more baffled. What's a guy like you want so badly with my tree farm?" "I don't want the farm." Micah narrowed his eyes, and my fingers tightened on the spoon I held. "What I mean is, Willett Goss is interested in the property, the land itself, not the business." "Why?" It's not like there's oil here or anything worth the kind of money you've been throwing my way. What could some bigwig company from the city want with this out-of-the-way lot?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?